start, people can join in. Welcome to this event. The UK TRE community, through the Funding and Sustainability Working Group, have this session prepared. Thank you everyone from joining. I'm Pete, and with Lisa in the room here and with Claire, we hope to kick off a discussion with you all about what we should do to carry on with this working group, and also to impart some thoughts into a debate about the future and approach for funding and sustainability. Quick reminder, it's being recorded for Zoom and then YouTube. Hopefully that will be helping us with transcribing some notes for what was discussed and what was raised. But just to also flag folk that we've got a date planned for March the 26th, which is the next UK TRE event. We'll be focusing on information governance, and information for about joining and registering will be out, I hope, this week, but we will see. Keep also those other dates in mind. So without further ado, I think we should crack on with the agenda. So this is what we plan to talk about.
So hello everyone, this is today's agenda. I'm Lisa Scerri. I shall start by talking about the survey that we ran last year, the working group survey, followed by Clare from NHS England talking about the commercial and pricing model that they developed for the SDE network. And last of all, Pete will be talking more generally about his thoughts on funding of TREs and SDEs. So we'll run through those presentations, and then at past we'll start the discussion. So let's carry on. Thank you, Pete. So here's our speakers. And I will start. So we set up the working group, Financial Sustainability Working Group, in March 24, with the aim of answering the question of how do we run a financially sustainable TRE. So we thought, with such a great community of people that have TREs, that we would send out a survey and find out information on what kind of costs they were charging for, what cost categories were they charging for, what models were they using, where were their funding coming from, and any ideas that we could share with the community to help increase income for our TREs. So we sent out the survey last summer, and we got 13 organisations reply. So I'll just run through the results. Next slide, please. So were they expected to be financially sustainable? Of the 13 organisations, only 5 were expected to bring in income to cover the full cost of their TRE. 4 out of 5 NHS organisations that completed the survey said that they were expected to be fully sustainable, and 1 had to only meet part of their costs, although they were a national body. Of the academic organisations, 4 out of 5 were expected to cover some of their costs, and 1 was fully funded by their institution. So no academic institutions were expected to cover their costs completely, which is an interesting finding. And of the 3 non-profits, they were equally, 1 in the financially sustainability group, and 1 had to meet some of their costs, and 1 was fully funded. Next slide, please. So what did they say were their annual costs of running a TRE? So not everybody knew what their costs were. There were some that were in the process of being set up or had only just opened. Of the ones that did, they said that their costs were between 90,000 and 4 million a year. Obviously, that is a huge difference, but that really reflected the different kind of model they were using for estimating their costs. Some included staff, and some really only included the technology. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of things they were charging for. Very few were charging for data. And I think that's because in the NHS, that's not a model that we're used to. Certainly everyone was charging to try and cover their costs in terms of accessing the data for delivery of workspaces. But it was interesting how some centres were also charging for lots of other services, which I thought would be useful to share. because really we should be trying to cover as many of the costs as possible if we want to be financially sustainable. Next slide, please. So how did they, where did they get their funding from? Of the 11 organisations that charged their services, 6 out of 11 had most of their funding from academic research grants, and the rest were either funded internally or by non-profit organisations. Interestingly, only one mentioned receiving commercial funding. As far as transparency, about half had details of their charges on their websites. Others explained that costs were so variable that they were unable really to show what their costs were. The majority had differential pricing, so they were charging commercial funders and researchers more than non-commercial customers. And only 2 actually charged for the data itself. Next slide, please, Pete. So I don't like to draw too many conclusions from such a small set of results, but I thought it was really interesting that there was so little commercial income coming in when a lot of the strategy around TREs seems to mention commercial income. And for this reason that I really wanted to share the NHS commercial costing template for the SDE network, and Clare Pepper kindly agreed to come along from NHS England to share this, because it's a really good piece of work, and I think if you want to set up a costing template, it's very helpful to see what they've done. Also, we've had a couple of meetings of the working group, and in September we had a really interesting discussion with one of our public members of the community, who was asking, why, if TREs are so obviously important for protection of data and for secure data sharing, why weren't they centrally funded? And so Pete, after Claire, will be taking on this question and looking at funding more generally. So really, we've set out what we aim to do with the working group, which was to create the survey and then to share the results. So at the end of this meeting, it'd be really nice if we could have some discussion on what to do next. So I'd like to now pass over to Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much. And I am going to try and switch to my screen to save myself having to repeatedly ask for you to change slides. If you could just confirm whether that's sharing for me.
Not so far.
Not so far. Let me try again then.
Looks like it's coming up, Claire.
Okay.
Yep.
Showing as it is on my side, so hopefully that is on yours as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. So I think we've got about 15 minutes or so now to talk through the NHS England Data for R&D programme, specifically the commercial arrangements for the SDE network. I am going to give a little bit of a background to the Data for R&D programme as well. I'm sure most people on this call are familiar. However, it just gives an opportunity to cover off any information should you not be. And then we'll get a little bit into the commercial approach as it is now. And I think that is important to emphasise. It is something that is always evolving and developing, and kind of welcome feedback. And certainly those results from the survey you've just taken us through are very interesting, and certainly prompt some additional questions that we can then explore. If I could ask for you to hold questions to the end, and then we'll cover them all together after Pete's also run through his slides. But if you do want to add anything as a question to the chat box through this session, then we can pick those up as well as anyone who wants to come in verbally at that point. Also, I should mention, I am here with my colleague Emma Harris. So the way that Emma and I split our activity within the Data for R&D programme is I'm responsible for the design of common commercial artefacts and the common commercial operating model. Emma is our Assistant Director of Programmes and is also responsible for the overall financing of the Data for R&D programme. So the Data for R&D programme, this is a programme that's been active in NHS England coming up to the end of its third year now. And the overall mission that the programme is seeking to fulfil is the delivery of rapid access to the world's largest linked health data sets, with three core benefits that we're seeking to fulfil: the improvement of care, supporting innovation, and sustaining the NHS. And an element, not all, but an element of that sustainability of the NHS is considering the opportunity from a commercial perspective, which is what we're then focusing on now. This builds on a long history in terms of data access and research. And most of that history is coloured by incredibly complex systems with a heavily fragmented ecosystem where data can be difficult to get access to because of a mixture of different factors, complex processes, variable processes, a lot of human-based input needed to fulfill access, and also some complexity in terms of the overall governance, which can be incredibly time-consuming, push out the timescales and totality, which makes it non-viable for particular research projects to take place, especially under a grant-based structure. And because the data can be incomplete in the way that it previously has been stored and accessed, that can result in a research project not being able to meet its full ambition. Where is this programme then trying to get us to? Overall, we're looking at defragging the data landscape across England, looking to achieve a data access system which gives access to 57 million patient records, with additional services included within the overall service construct, and notably that including access to expert clinicians who are close to where the data is originally stored to give best input as to what the data truly reflects. That is intended to all build on public confidence, and there is a large investment through the Data for R&D programme, which is focused on public engagement. That is constructed of actual national deliberations and face-to-face engagement and virtual engagement with the public, but it also includes specific activities like considering certain ways of communicating, methods and tools that can be used at scale by the overall community. As we start to address the fragmentation within the network, within the system in total, we're looking at introducing key points of consistency across the way that the NHS England SDE network is currently constructed. Those key points of consistency at the moment have been focused on improving the way that services can be first browsed, cohort discovery tools also at the front end, and we're working closely with our partners HDI UK to make the most of the innovation gateway and capability that sits there. Also focusing in on the contracting process, and that's where we start to come into the commercial arrangements with a consistent commercial framework, which introduce a pricing structure centred around three core areas of service delivery, which I'll take you through in a moment, as well as common contracts that can be used across all researchers accessing data from the NHS SDE network. We're looking at bringing in additional consistency to the way that the governance structure, keeping data controllership where it is and should be, but introducing layers of consistency through common ways of operating data access committees. That is also supported by additional common artefacts like a data access request form, which is then linked to registries, which will allow for researchers to be able to input information less times in total, and for that information to be stored in an appropriate way and reused where it's needed, rather than needing to repeatedly fill out the same information in multiple different forms and places. And finally, and probably most importantly, starting to introduce additional consistency into the way that the actual user environments within SDEs are constructed, which will also allow for additional federation capability. So this is a single programme led by the NHS England team, but funded by DSIT, DH, NHS England, and seeking other funders going into the new funding period in the next financial year. And as I've mentioned, it's aiming to deliver access to 57 million of our population across England, with our eyes longer term on how we continue to do this on scale across our devolved nations also. At that point, I'm going to stop in terms of the background and start to get a little bit more into the detail. I mentioned briefly that we are constructing the pricing model around 3 key service components. Those are data as a service, platform as a service, and consultancy as a service. The data as a service element is what often is talked about most, but I don't think you can forgo the discussions around platform and consultancy. So data as a service is actually provision of the published, linked and curated NHS health data, with the option as we continue to onboard additional data for that to be broadened from health to health and care, as well as considering longer term additional data that may be beneficial to hold within the SDEs. There's also the option through the SDEs to bring your own data and synthetic data sets as well. Platform as a service is provision of a specialised and secure platform, tool sets that enable users to access, manage and analyse any of that data, all within a controlled and compliant environment which meets certain standards and specified and can be published so that the public can also understand the particular security measures that are in place around each of those environments. Those tools include quite standard tools such as Python, SQL, Server, Management Studio, RStudio. However, there is also the option for additional tooling to be added to each of those SDEs, depending on the specific requirements for a particular research project. And then consultancy as a service. I mentioned earlier about the clinical consultancy, but there's also other consultancy and people-based resource options which are available via the SDEs, including things such as project management and analytical capability as well. Some of the core common principles and approach then from a commercial point of view to be able to address the fragmentation that I've spoken about and the complexity and variability across the current SDEs, that we've started to build in these points of consistency in the way that the SDEs operate, utilising some core principles around ensuring that that harmonisation is there for improvements to user experience, and that it enables federation, and it starts to build towards a point of sustainability, financial sustainability, that is. As a minimum, each project must recover its own costs, and that's a key element that I would welcome views on. It's interesting to see the reflections from the survey earlier as well, that the pricing approach aligns to the value sharing framework. And one of the areas of the value sharing framework is the stipulation that a project price will not be differentiated based on the user of that particular project. And development of the pricing approach is to be staged. So at the moment we're introducing these initial points of consistency, you'll often hear me and other team members talk about minimal viable products, but that is part of an ongoing journey as we go into the new financial year and further funding rounds. So how are we doing this? There's a standard data access agreement that is being implemented across the network that supports the ease of contracting. It includes both single project and framework variants. And we are working with the HRA to get approval of that DAA, which will allow for it to be utilised across the HRA application process also. The value of data is to be determined and differentiated based on the nature of the project in which it's being used rather than the specific user. As I mentioned, that is one of the current principles which is outlined within the value sharing framework. And where applicable, we're seeking a share of the value derived from the use of NHS data assets, which talks to the public engagement that has taken place within this space, which we have specifically sought public feedback as to the acceptability and the desire to ensure that value is derived from NHS data assets as long as they are used in a controlled and compliant environment in the way that I briefly described. And that value return options are flexible for users, both in terms of the timing and method, but also in terms of the risk mitigation. And that risk element is beneficial not just for the users, but also for the individual SDE that's contracting for a specific project. So how that then looks in totality, based on those 3 service areas, when we are in a negotiation phase with a particular customer for a particular project, The price of that project will be constructed on 3 layers based on the price for the platform and the cost behind that, any particular consultancy services that are added, which may well be optional, they may not be needed for a particular project, and then the data elements and with that specific value share element under the data, which allows us to derive additional value where it's appropriate to do so and when there's an appropriate mechanism to be able to do it by. So the data access is kind of constructed of those three elements, each one of those individually negotiated, and the intent and the way that we work with our users is that there's a level of transparency in terms of how that price is built up, so it's very clear about where the cost is going and the benefit and return against each of those elements. We have been kind of questioned before through some of these forums on some of the principles, so I just thought I would quickly run through a bit of an FAQ effectively, and then please, kind of, as I said, when we get to questions and answers, we can layer on any additional questions should it be beneficial to do so. So one of the questions that we've previously been asked by users and members of the broader TRE or SDE communities is around the application of the NCVR. I just wanted to confirm to this group that it's been agreed that the SDE pricing is exempt from the NCVR, which I can go into more detail if it's beneficial to do so. And I also wanted to just call out one other of these FAQs, which is around our ability to scale up resource. This talks a little bit about the point around financial sustainability. One of the greatest constraints at present is access to the commercial expertise and operational expertise to be able to run the overall NHS Research SDE network at the scale that is needed to ensure that there is the project throughput that will allow for the model to be sustainable. And there is significant work that is occurring across the network and from the programme to ensure that there is financial backing to bringing in the right expertise so that we can continue to build out the personnel that are required to be able to deliver. At that point, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And pass back to you, Pete.
Thank you, Claire. You're still sharing your screen this end?
Oh, it has come off on my end. Oh, there we go. You get so used to using one system, Pete, so I'm a Teams girl rather than a Zoom girl, so I'm struggling with the changeover of systems, and you're keeping me on my toes, but hopefully that has now come off.
It has indeed, and hopefully you can see some other slides that have my name on it. So thank you so much indeed. I will hopefully prompt a set of thoughts. These are clearly not an answer. They're clearly a hypothesis, a set of views that have been created to stimulate this discussion that we're hoping that the next roughly half an hour to 45 minutes after this will create. So thank you. I was struck by the Sudlow report when I was reading it, and if you haven't, please read the executive summary, which is very well written and summarizes, I think, the whole thing very, very well. I've tried to read it all, but it is a good long report with lots of detail in it. But picking out 2 things at the top from the overall executive summary recommendations, it talks about the national health data as a critical national infrastructure. It doesn't define it as NHS only. It talks about health being a wider suite of things, including care, mental health, and others. But it also says there should be a strategy with leadership and investment to match. And then it talks a little bit lower down in that same top level executive description as having a ring-fenced budget for supporting such an entity. And you can see in recommendation 2 blue parts that talk about having such a ring-fenced budget and also implementing an acceptable, transparent investment strategy for health data infrastructure and models for data access, cost recovery and pricing, which we've heard about with Claire. And I think this was the first time I think I have heard and seen a presentation of the problem in a clear and from the sourcing rather than from the policy making viewpoint, the NHS, the Statistics Authority and such like as the instigators of the report. So I thought that was very useful, and it's correlating, apologies, with some of the thinking that we have had here at the Crick, but this is here to prompt us in a debate and a discussion. So this is illustrative pictures that hopefully ping lots of ideas in everyone around this call of 70 people. So as a hypothesis to start the debate, it feels as though we could take any specific data source within the NHS or anywhere else, and very often that data will be going, the same data will be going into more than one trusted research environment / secure data environment / whatever we wish to call it. So the data might be replicated of certain types, but again, there is no strategy for mastering that data. Sudlow talks to this. There's also missing worlds of data, such as pathology, imagery and other things that is missing, but there are some plans to do that. Equally, there is a whole variety of technologies that these TREs can work on and do work on, mainly more recently in cloud technology land, but on-prem too. But there's no standards of common connection capability, no economies of scale, no purchasing power economies being exploited. Obviously, TREs have data to IG research support, information governance research support skills, and everything in between. So all of these TREs are fronting and supporting that same cost. Those skills are very rare and specialist, and there's divergence of policy and practice across the different TREs and SDE worlds. We don't follow the same approaches. We don't trust each other as sources of. And then each project comes to one or more of these data TRE sources and runs. And these have varying compute needs. Some are very extensive high performance compute. Others are wishing to dominate with machine learning and AI algorithm development, which requires more specialist type of computing capability. But very similar projects are using the same data from potentially different sources. And we have stave-piped research thinking based on available access to the sorts of data sets that they're familiar with within their TREs. And within the UK TRE community, we've talked a lot about the move. The future looks like a federated world of bespoke, curated data sets in the equivalent of a secure data environment to store and curate, and a trusted research environment to manipulate and process. So some takeaways from this, I think, are there are lots of opportunities here, but we need to think about the macro whole world view rather than independent views. We'll talk more about that in a minute. There are still some significant gaps as well as over provision. And I think there's plenty to do. Everyone needs to get in the best position to work as a brilliant team to deliver this for UK research. And we're not quite there yet. I think a manager would come in a football analogy and say, we've got some progress we can make. If we look at the spending today, and in this sense is bringing out some of the data from UKRI, but also connecting it to the statements that Sudlow and others have made that talks about the time it takes to get from grant funding to access data being potentially quite long. If we look at the last few years of the data from the Gateway to Research location, downloaded and looked at the different funding research councils, typically a PhD is about 4 years as expected, and grant funding projects are maybe 3 on average. So that 1.5 years-ish, or so many months of delay for a data type project is a large significant proportion of the overall duration of these sorts of grant / funding processes. And if you look at the amount of new money that is provided per year into new projects that start in these years across these research councils, it's £2 billion. So obviously these research councils have different levels of investment into the projects that would need secure data environments, but nonetheless, even at 10%, we're talking about 200 million, and a halving of the rate, the time to data access is probably giving an equivalent value of at least 100 million in terms of the return back from halving that time to research. So the shortening time to research as an objective can release a step change in the value for money from the taxpayers' investments in UK research. And by looking at this whole process system problem is the only way probably of achieving such. And I think that's the story behind investing a strategy into a national data asset for exploitation of health data and any other data sets. So the need to have a technology strategy for investing, which is not a gigaflop / terabyte based model, but a whole system cost model, seems to me essential, because the dominating value for money is that £100 million of return that we can get from better utilization of investment research money. So we need to keep more money in the system by allowing that return of that into sustainable skills and careers to round this. And that mirrors the MRI, Medical Research Council and others, UKRI's digital research infrastructure strategy. So let's look at funding models. This is obviously purely illustrative, but it feels to me as though on the left-hand side, we start with collecting data from the human subject, wherever they are, through NHS lands of allocated government budgets to bodies that apportion that into money that will go into systems and processes and IT that those systems, those operations run. Then there's the stage of collating and curating, and Clare has given us a full view of the world of the National Data for Research and programme, and that's either taxpayer grant funded through apportioned budgets or potentially through some core commercial investment like Our Future Health, and that looks after the facilitating infrastructure, the storage and the data worlds and security of access. But we also have a model of taxpayer funding into grants and potentially commercial funding, obviously, which looks at specific projects with apportioned budgets for doing things, such as the toolings, the project groups, the compute, all of those things. These are very different resources. And finally, we also have taxpayers paying for the resources in research performing organizations, such as staff, researchers with their pedigrees, all of the support around research that is needed in order for such to go. But it's the left to right process from data sourced, granted access to projects, analysed and then published, that is the mechanism by which we transfer investment across this workflow into return for the human in our society. And that's the bit that seems to be not clear at all about how we go about facilitating this left to right process in a cohesive way with funding, governance of data and information and resources. And so really, because the taxpayer is funding an awful lot of this, what is this strategy? Why haven't we got one that looks at this end-to-end flow? Maybe I'm missing it, maybe it's out there. I'd love to hear later when we talk in our discussion. And the zones, however, are very different. We can see that they're portioned by grant funding on one side of the research zone, but probably apportioned budgets sustaining core facilities on the data zone side. So what about these costs? We've seen some of these icons come up already. So that's the physical stuff, and there's services, licenses, storage and compute costs that come from that, either as a platform as a service model or from a data as a service type processing curation services that Clare talked about. But there's all of these staff salary costs that surround a typical SDE TRE around the data engineering, the information governancing and management of bodies such as data access committees and things like that. So all of these resources are being consumed and paid for. So I think there's likely to be duplication of costs that could be possibly looked at, as well as economies of scale costs that can be looked at, that is further refining money back into this system for supporting research across the UK landscape. And these savings clearly should be reinvested. It's not a case of giving it back. We need more investment to retain and build the collection of soft as well as hard facilities to ensure research is done brilliantly and fast and delivering this time to research across the UK community research. So if we look at those particular cost drivers, let's look at the characteristic of them a bit. If you look at salary, I think that's quite a long timescale of change. Yes, there's inflation, and of course that grows, but it's about skilling people, and those skills change relatively slowly as people develop those skills. And it's probably 50-50 across the data and the research zone. But if you look at storage, that again is a long-term thing. Storage change, technology changes quite quickly, but with cloud, that's someone else's problem. And it's a growth of data that we're worried about. And that is something that we can account for in a specific way with a known forward forecasting model, probably. There, I think the split of storage is more data zone than research zone. If you look, however, at compute, that's quite a short-term thing. The amount of processing demand driven by the amount of data or the complexity of the question or those sorts of things are driving a much faster agenda towards fast changing GPU, so graphical processing unit type processing, rather than the normal CPU type of processing unit. And that is very fast comparatively. So many years of changing out your compute factor, your facilities, because they're now redundant and or not sufficient for the job. And that's probably more 2080 in the research zone favor. And then from a license and other type of costs, these are short to medium, fast in the sense that the software changes and get new releases and upgrades, but slow in the sense of the people using them need reskilling and retraining, and that's a longer time frame. And again, probably more research zone than data zone from the licensing costs. So when we look at this, I think the picture I got was that these cost types drive different things, and the different zones are dominated by different types of cost. And if we don't think about those differences and understand them and then design our facilities sufficiently and treat those zones differently, we're potentially going to have problems. So as Clare described, if you take this model of a TRE SDE, we've probably got a data collection preparation type services. And I think that's a strong product. It's quite high barriers to entry and makes lots of sense. We want to do that well in one or two places and then exploit it. We've also got this flexible, secure, scalable compute service. And again, providing those sort of facilities to projects, pretty high barrier to entry, a very strong model for service type models. And I think there's another one, which is around information governance as a service. It's quite difficult to do, very specialist, needs to be everywhere and done in a controlled way across this whole world. But to have a research discovery of data, I think that's quite a weak model. It's really saying that we haven't done a good job cataloging our data. And that will quickly be got rid of as people learn how to join the data up more quickly. And therefore, I think that's a weak model for a product. But either way, we should take away a consistent service and product list where all TREs look similar and follow a similar style. And I think that's what's come out from both Claire's talk and Lisa's talk earlier. So I think moving, however, to a whole system will remove many points of potential failure. And to have a competitive, heterogeneous approach across separated organizations, I think is a very weak model and doesn't feel in the spirit of the Sudlow Review and other discussions. So what's the proposal? I think given that this is the slide we had before, given that the left-hand side, the operational zone, that's apportioned budgets through a funding and discussion forum in the political and organizational sphere. And on the right-hand side, the research organization, that's again a funding model driven by the taxpayer in a policy way. I'm going to leave those two aside. But I think the data zone, if we are going to move to a national data library approach, then funding core ring-fence budgets for those specific libraries that are specifically tailored for those specific sets, whatever they turn out to be, seems a very good suggestion. And that's where the data collection, preparation, curation services and resources should focus. Equally, providing one or two national research platforms that allows the grant-funded or core-funded ring-fenced DRI budgets that make those platforms in existence and look after them, and then the grant funding research project budgets that will run on them make sense. Obviously, we have information governance, but we need to also connect the national infrastructures for compute with those national data research facilities. It's not just the data collaboration zone and the research zone, the compute facilities need to be integrated. How we do that? Not totally, obviously, is a very big problem. But I think 1 or 2 national resources for TRE platforms connected to national compute DRIs or digital resource infrastructures would make sense, and fund projects that pay for the processing but fund those facilities through core. So main conclusions, we need to change, because I don't think our strategy will get us to the end goal we want for the UK. A whole system end-to-end model with specific data libraries, with all the data sets for the national infrastructure sounds sensible. Data zone players are very different from research zone players. We need to think of those differently. Separate funds to underpin the infrastructure rather than small allocated budgets. Reinvest the reduced time to research, economies of scale and duplication reduction savings into the curation, skills, facilities and research facilities. Standardize on specific TRE service products will help align us all more clearly. And we've got such a lot to do. It's about growing the community, not shrinking it. And therefore, let's adjust our positions that we play to form a better team. Thank you very much for listening. That was aimed at promoting a discussion. So onwards to those discussions. We do have 3 questions we would like you to consider, but we'll maybe come back to those. And the focus, if you want to get on Slido very quickly, those are the links, and I'll take you a minute or 2 just so you can go, hopefully with my fabulous colleagues, Simon/David, who can help with the Slido. I hope that might work. Well, fingers crossed it will. If you can go to those, that would be super. Elsewise, I'll leave it up for a minute or 2 just for allow people to either find the link or copy the link or photograph it so that you can join in and help complete. And then what we'll do is we'll split and start a discussion. So I'm going to leave it for just a couple more seconds for people to do whatever they're going to do. And then yell if you need to get that QR code or link, and maybe we can post it in the chat for those people who haven't got it. That'd be very helpful. We thought it would be good to have some clarification time. Is there anything you want to verify understanding of before we shoot on? We don't want too much time spent here. And then we thought we'd have a discussion and thoughts from everyone, a very open dialogue across the community. It looks like we've got a good time, 45 minutes of time to spend. Thank you very much, Claire and Lisa, for helping. Probably I've overrun, but keep such a good time available. And then we want to talk about the open working groups. Sorry, there was a question, a comment that flew up, so apologies. It was too quick for me. I'm going to stop sharing briefly so I can read the chat. Okay, thank you, David, for putting the first question up. I will go to my Slido and hopefully I can see the same question. X. That's probably wrong. No.
Can I ask you a question, please, Claire, from your presentation?
Of course.
What you said that the commercial model that you've developed won't have to comply with the NCVR. What is that?
It's a national contracting framework, which is specifically under the NIHR, and actually I think someone earlier helpfully shared it within the chat so people can look into it a little bit further. It is primarily focused on trials in the way that it is structured, and some SDEs that have been born within the network from more of that background operate under the NCVR at present, the National Contract Value review, the framework there, but it is less applicable to the broader set of services and data access service constructs that I spoke to earlier, but for kind of ensure that we can have the continuity of the existing SDEs that have operated under it, but confirmation on then the applicability long term. We've got that kind of formal legal position that it doesn't apply on an ongoing basis under those arrangements. I also wondered, while I am off mute, Claire, I can see you've also added a comment within the chat here. Just give everyone a moment to add additional things to the Slido, but I thought it might be worth kind of commenting on that. So the overarching data access policy which is the kind of governing policy within this space, and what the Data for R&D programme under NHS England is the operational arm for, is explicitly articulates the need for data access to be under NHS controlled environments. As you say, that therefore has us to a position where we are supportive of, as Clare Bloomfield I think has previously kind of articulated to you, supportive of existing NHS-based or trust-based SDEs continuing alongside regional ones. Now, in terms of the longer-term landscape, what we do not want to see happen is any further parallel investments going into any kind of new architecture, when actually that investment may be better placed in augmenting and converging existing architecture rather than building anything new. But there are no direct plans at present to change that position of support that Clare had previously reinforced to you. Hopefully, Clare, that helps to answer. Clare McDonald, that is, helped to answer that question.
Thanks so much, Clare, for picking that one up off the chat. We have our second Slido question that's been up and running. So please, if you are on Slido, go. The answer to the first one that I saw was that, should this working group continue? The answer was a vast majority yes. 97% of the 36 respondents said yes. So that was the first question. Please carry on. While people are doing that, let me just check the Slack. There's a question if there are any more questions in the Q&A and or the chat. Philip, in terms of building.
Just one more. I think people are asking for a clarification on the question. Do you mean the whole of the UK when we are asking national here?
Yes, we do mean the UK as a whole, not an England or whatever. Thank you for that intervention, David. Exactly. It's should the group, this group here, think about how we engage and how we can contribute to the national that means UK-wide strategy for funding. Thanks. That's a very good question, whoever did it or was raising it. Thank you, David, for jumping in there. That's really great. I was just picking up one of the other questions while we leave. Could we leave that question up for a little while, David? There was a question. Oh, gosh, I've lost it now. Bear with me. Philip, I thought, was asking it. In terms of building TRE federated TREs for the NHS, is there an interest in leveraging existing builds in the UK, or is there a need for a standalone or collaborate on a build? And I can see, Simon, you've made a reply. Any other wider views on that personally, either Clare or anyone? My personal view is, I guess, federation, the word federation is the only way forward that I can personally see for us. We can't think about it'll take too long, cost too much to have one world of data. How we treat NHS data must become something that is in very secure, safe hands, but is joinable to lots of other data that isn't NHS data, that is going to be usable and needable, such as wearable devices, all sorts of things that the research community have existing platforms to support. So I can't see anything other than federation is my view back to that challenging question, Philip.
Perhaps show the Q&A on the screen.
I'm not sure it's not a Q&A, it's just the chat window. I'm not sure I can, if I share my screen, whether the chat comes up. Philip, are you able to comment on your own view a bit more on that question?
No, thanks very much, and thanks for that response. So there are a number of activities going on, of course, in various settings, population cohorts that are trying to build federated TRE models across some of the major, not just UK, but international activities. And when we're seeking resources and funding from the same types of organizations you were referring to, we're always asked, well, what do you know about what's happening in this space or this space? And so there's always this concern that there's duplication of efforts to some extent as well. So that's partly the motivation for why I raised that as well.
Thank you.
Simon's got his hand up.
Simon, please.
Yeah, I might as well respond. So I think, as I said in the chat, this is something that the UK are hopefully are funding or look. So if you hang around for maybe a couple of months, there should be a flow of emails on all the various discussion lists about some of the work we're doing with like federated TREs in the UK. So say we've already got one of our partners will be Lancashire, who have a TRE that they're trying to encourage other TRE. So they've got a TRE that they're running as an SDE. They're trying to encourage other people to use it. And I say there's a lot of federation work going on. We do, and like one of the core things behind this bid is that it's all going to be in the public. So it's public discussion wherever possible. And Chris Gold's got his hand up. So Chris, do you want to take over?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm heavily involved in the DARE program. So we're seeing the panel this week to get feedback on the proposal. So all going well, we'll be having a massive kickoff meeting in March when the project starts. So yeah, keep an eye on your emails because we'll be wanting to engage as widely and as inclusively as possible within this space. So think of like what we did with the Turing team and everyone during the Sartre project and other projects like Sacro and Teleport and Terrifics, that we're doing this with the community and trying to get everyone input in and on that. So yeah, that will be happening as soon as we find out the outcome of our funding, which will be in a couple of weeks, hopefully.
Thanks for that update, Chris and Simon. I saw that Claire, you've got your hand up.
I do, and I was going to take something quite a different topic into the space of public acceptability of models, which there's a few comments in the chat. So I thought I'd just pick up on that thread, if that's okay. And actually, Will has just come in and answer the question exactly as I was about to kind of portray verbally. So the question that has come through is kind of what's the public acceptability about different models, both the size of SDEs, TREs, and also different federation approaches. So there's been a significant amount of public engagement over the last few years. The public engagement that took place at the beginning of this 3-year funding cycle that's just coming to an end in the NHS England Data for R&D programme looked at the size of the regional SDEs and tested the acceptability of those sizes. And there was definitely a point of at about 5 million where acceptability started to drop off. And that's part of the insight that has led to the regional construct as is. However, that didn't test all of the different models of federation and really seek public input and acceptability measures around how federation can support access broader and how that starts to kind of break some of that direct linkage between what might at the moment be seen as quite a linear model of a certain population group and certain therefore data sets and certain researcher access into something which is a bit more complex. I think the trick there is really being able to find a way that we can build a narrative which articulates it, which then allows us to run through more public acceptability testing over the next year to look at all of these different variants of how actually this could be delivered. And there will be ongoing funding from the central programme, but also I know a lot of individual SDEs and TREs invest heavily within local engagement and certainly welcome that information being shared broadly so we can benefit from it and understand any variances nationally to public opinion about different models so that we can find one which works both technically, works for our researcher base, but also works in line with public trust.
Thank you, Claire. I think that's totally right. Seems to make sense that one big place is less trustworthy than local places. But then, as people often say, I'm in 4 or 5 different SDEs, so my longitudinal data, which lots of people would probably want, my history, etc., would need to be collated, and that's therefore having your model of a federated set of SDEs in the world of the NHS only. But that means there's still going to be a lot of SDEs that are curating data on other things and the like. Thank you so much. I'm just going down the question set, if that's okay. So I'm now at Will, your question that you raised that I think has been somewhat addressed, and I think we've just spoken about it but then there was a follow-up that I think, Claire, you commented on. Could we have a discussion around that? Because it seems very pertinent, which is to this precise topic. It seems to be talking around the fact that the reason why we've set up with these things is everyone's trying to mobilize value out of data, and that funding principle is therefore dividing and conquering and not conquering. Is that what your conclusion is, Will, that you're saying, or have I misinterpreted? Then we'll get on to Amy Tilbrook's question.
No, I mean, I think that feels to me like the dichotomy. Like in one hand, if we had all data in one system, we could get rid of all these problems of wasted costs and bureaucracy. The economies of scale would be great, and we perhaps could do clever segregation to keep IG happy. But at the moment, it feels like the drivers. I mean, there's a proliferation of infrastructure, TREs and SDEs. You know, and people have vested interest. Data is seen as an income stream. The NHS, I mean, this is no secret, and Claire on it on the slides. I mean, it's like bringing money in for value back into the NHS is a really good thing. And I think everyone that owns data feels the same right now, but that's maybe a conflict of, you know, the public in terms of tax revenue and also researchers in terms of using the systems. It's a difficult one. It's politics, I think, really.
Any wider thoughts from others on this session? I'm very much in agreement, Will, with you, which was, I think, hopefully what you got from my attempt to summarize the big picture. Because before we move on, I was going to be a bit challenging then, is to say, well, how do we expect the world to work if we do, and you may disagree, but if we do have an SDE TRE split in terms of the resources required to run them and the scales, the timeframes upon which those resources will be driven change, and when we're looking forward to the future, if we're not going to look at the left to right process flow and fund that, think about that as our primary design, rather than worrying about, you know, a vertical based picture, how else will we do it, and how else will we fix if you don't agree with that being a problem, say so, but if there is a problem, how else will we fix it? How else will we get to a UK fast research integrated world of data for projects to make use of in safe ways, if we're not aligning our funding to the process flow from left to right in the diagrams I shared, rather than vertically?
Yeah, everyone agrees with you.
That can't be true.
I disagree. Okay, I disagree. I'm Jan van Hemert. I work for the EPCC, and the EPC hosts Scottish National Safe Haven and 7 other TREs. I've recently reviewed a funding proposal in Germany where instead of building one central database, they are federating 42 TREs together. So that's one other option, is rather than building one big data library, funding and bringing all these parties together in one big funding bid.
Thanks, Jano. Oh, sorry, go on, please.
Yeah, and then of course that requires a lot of standardization. And so a lot of the tasks in that is not about the core funding for each of the actual partners and the services they already provide, but it's really about making standardization of the services so that they can interoperate and that researchers are not faced with endless variants of documents and other things. leave it.
I couldn't agree. Sorry, Jenna. I couldn't agree more. And I think that was the whole tenet of what my slides were trying to say. So I think we're very much on the same page. The federated model and the harnessing the existing sets together and investing in only a few more. I wonder whether Germany are planning to develop another 50 TREs independently and then within that framework, I doubt. Thank you. Any other questions? Claire, I think you wanted to fill in a comment. Claire MacDonald, that is.
Sorry, I'm a bit like other people and I'm not used to Zoom, trying to find all the hands and things. It's taking me a bit of a while. I always kind of say the same thing, that it basically comes down to how the money flows and how it's expected to flow. Because if you think about, if you take the data out of it and think about traditionally how research worked in interventional trials, NHS bodies are paid per recruit for their trials. So they're encouraged to start more trials, get more recruits, blah, blah, blah. And you get a bit of money back per recruit to show sort of how well you are doing, how good you are at doing research in your organization. So that model is still the mindset and is still part of how all this works. So we're expected to add to that revenue in the trust and bolster it for the R&I directorates. So sort of munging everything into one consolidated place or a couple of sort of consolidated places is seen as a threat to the income of the trust because it's going to destabilize it. So that, to me, nothing will be fixed until that is fixed.
Thanks, Claire. Gerald, you've got your hand up, please.
Yes, I was just going to echo the sentiments that Claire has put there, that it's almost back to that follow the money type of setup. If the incentives are about the money being made available, it will change behavior. People tend to behave or act as inconsistent with how the structures do. So if we're going to go for a federated approach, I think that also means that we've got to find the payment structures in a way that allows that change. Because otherwise, if the incentive is such that people have to create centers of excellence wherever they are, without having to put effort in the commons as they were, I think it will still have that same challenge. That without, so if the decision is to go with a federated approach, which I think one of its strengths is the agility. That means each and every organization gets ready to prepare their data so that it can be federated, or at least we agree to some interoperability standards that everybody can adhere to. Then yes, those systems can be connected. But I'm persuaded that as long as our first premise is that we want to get the best value, but also to get the best outcomes for research and the health provision, then a federated approach is going to be a much, much quicker way to get there, because then it also increases the ability for innovation as opposed to trying to do it once. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerald. I think the third what I call Slido question is up or coming up now. Just to summarize do we think we should be involved in the national debates? That was at 91% said yes. So the next one is, do you think we should have a dedicated UK TRE event on funding and sustainability in the June meeting? There's an option to focus that June event. March is focused, as you saw, on information governance, but the June event could be focused on funding and sustainability. That's the present plan. We want to gauge your views as to whether that's a thing or not. Please, if you could respond, that would be very, very helpful. But let's carry on the debate. Thank you, Gerald, for your things. I'll go to the chat, if that's okay, and pick up Amy's T's question. For the small numbers of TRE SDEs, is the suggestion a single place for all data to be held, a data lake? I don't think that's my suggestion, but it may be other people's views. Something the previous public engagement work has found is not popular. Definitely agree. Or does this fit with a federated model? My answer is yes. Amy, wider views, I think we've talked a little bit about that. Gerald was just talking about that, and otherwise also apologies, I'm getting them right. Jano, apologies if my pronunciation is was also talking about the German picture of federation being a way forward. Thoughts on that? I see that both Will and Tom have commented in chat, but maybe you want to broaden that debate or broaden your voice onto the call. Any dissenting from a not to have a single place but to federate? Is there any dissenting voice on the call for that type of model? Because we'd need obviously the financing model and the sustainability model to mirror that sort of model of federation. Amy.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, just checking, different headphones. I understood from the comments I got back that we were talking about a federated model, that it's not about a single data lake, but you just said anyone dissenting and thinks that we need a federated model, so I'm a bit confused. What are you asking?
Sorry, it was to your question on the chat. Is the suggestion a single place for all the data to be held, brackets data lake? And then you made the point that public engagement doesn't really like that general model. And so I was saying, well, does anyone on this call believe we should have a central single place for all the data, or does everyone on this call support the move to the general, the challenger foot is federation, how we do it?
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
Thank you for clarifying, Amy. Will, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of similar vein. The whole federation thing. I mean, are we talking here with, you know, data in different physical locations that still has to be shunted about in order for a processor to work on it, or are we talking about something very clever by, you know, homomorphic encryption, the sort of stuff that people talk about that doesn't really happen, where data allegedly stays where it is and then is processed? I think federation is a term we don't really have a proper definition of yet to really sort of get stuck in with. At the moment, my concern is really just that there's a proliferation of TREs and SDEs, which doesn't really make sense financially or for researchers. But the other side of this coin is either money or ownership. I mean, and also Chris has made a valid point about all your eggs in one basket. You know, a bomb goes off and then you lose everything. So there are reasons, but it feels like there's a number somewhere between 1 and hundreds, which is where we should be in at the moment. It's nearer hundreds.
Yes, I think that's a very positive description of the problem space that we're trying to address here. I believe that if we're never going to a single place where someone does something bad and the world loses all their data, that would be madness. You'd never get that through any CIO type role. Equally, federation means how do you get processing to the data, which in information governance language, I'm not an expert here, would say that there must be some sort of control granted to the data, where even if it moves non-persistently to somewhere that's got lots of compute capabilities, such as the Edinburgh locations or others around the UK that are available for researchers to use, that still has to be played. It still needs to go into a computer to discharge actions on that data, doesn't it? So somehow we have to link these things off. Jano, you probably are much more able to give the chapter and verse here, and I see you've just raised your hand, so maybe you want to pitch in. I think we can't have federation I'm not using that in any specific words, folks. I'm saying it's a model where lots of people own the responsibility to create good quality data. The 11 national SDEs in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and then they join together to provide a whole view of citizens for the UK. There's also going to be sets for genetics or image files or whatever they turn out to be. Those sets, those big groups, those national data libraries that support those connect together in some shape or form to make a distributed federated type picture, and then that compute, however we set it up, can make use of that as long as the project is properly secure and proper people and all those things. Sorry, Jenna, you had your hand up and I seem to have talked enough to mean you to pull your hand down. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, two things. So one, yes, I mean, it is not trivial to just generalize about where compute and data needs to happen. For example, we also host in the Scottish National Safe Haven a full copy of the Scottish PACS system. So that is all radiology, PET scans, all that for 10 years. That's about 2 petabytes. So if you want to do anything on that, you cannot just take that out somewhere and process it somewhere else. That's an enormous amount of effort. So it really depends on the use case, what is possible in terms of federation. I'm a big proponent of it. A key issue, though, is not necessarily technology. I'm the PI on a project funded by ESRC to try out federation between the ONS and the Scottish National Safe Haven. And that's been a huge challenge. And we're trying to flush out all the barriers, or at least, make them very visible by trying to perform a study where 2 data sets have to be combined. And there you find that there's a lot of issues around governance and issues around ownership of data and so on. That needs to be addressed. It's literally not just the technology. We can make a lot of things work in federation, but there's also a lot to think about in terms of information governance.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Jenna. Thank you for that clarification and extra input. Gerald, you've got your hand up again, please. And then we'll move to John's comment, John's question.
Right. I was going to come back to Will, who asked a very pertinent question around federation. And help me here unless I'm getting it wrong. I was looking very much at the banking domain. So if you look at ATM machines, we all bank with a different bank, and you can use that. I think to me, that's a very good, simple analogy of how federation works. The bank still contains the data about all its customers, but each and every bank has infrastructure that within the federation means that you can use an ATM from a Lloyd's TSB and collect your money from Halifax forever. And I think if we could look at that as a model, for me, it almost speaks very much to where we can get our federation to work well, where each health entity will have their data, and then we agree a standardization that is interoperability to allow the sharing, and then research can come on board. And I think that, to me, sort of like addresses a few bits. And I'm not sure whether I'm very much simplifying this, or I'm looking very much at a wishful kind of scenario, but I think it should be something that's within our grasp to be able to adhere, or at least to aspire to. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Reminder of the Slido, if you're still there, there's a third question. Thank you. Pavlos, you wanted to pitch in on that one, please, and then we'll move to John's question in the chat at 12:34. We can't hear you, Pavlos.
Sorry. Generally about federation from kind of medical, without, I mean, there are many possibilities whether the data is actually moved to a common location or accessed by actual federated learning in technical terms by the AI. From that point of view, probably locating the data, for example, in the same cloud is good enough. So it is at least accessible to an algorithm that can do federated learning at scale. But for us, the main concern is, let's say, the bureaucracy. So we would like there to be a relatively, well, it would be too complex to establish projects with 10 different TREs in order to aggregate the data. So there has to be at the project level some coordination, and yet to ensure quality of data, we also expect that the local entities are connected to the physicians or the administrators or generally the staff who knew how the data got there. So this is maybe a guess, but perhaps maintaining the federated structure maintains data fidelity. So we imagine to have, like, for example, data adapters that say the data from this TRE, well, you have to process it this way because it's been anonymized this way. This particular field means that thing specifically, and there's a bit of adaptation for this trust, that trust, the next one, the next one. If the data is all aggregated, we fear, well, the compute would be simpler, but we fear the quality of the labeling and the precision might inadvertently go down. So it would be, for us, the golden point is to have a relatively unified organizational access portal, so that maybe we can talk the project through with one TRE, but then it can scale up to the whole of the UK, and that we can access the data through, let's say, one cloud provider, or at least not an ad hoc way each time. And that when we come to the detail, that the local data owners could assist with, I don't know, data quality or queries or clarifications or even use cases. We don't want to lose the local level. We think it's valuable. It's just so long as it doesn't overwhelm the running of any particular project. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's key points as to how we technically line up and then organizationally line up. I'm conscious I think I'm scanning, doing my best at the questions. John, you were next in line, talking about the slide around TREs, separating those out, and upstream uses of ICBs, for example, that they've got interest in doing lots of things around population health, risk stratification, etc. Could you articulate that question more clearly, or what's your thoughts on around duplication and such like? I personally saw all of those opportunities, so the population health, risk stratification, etc., not being totally being able to be done in the research domain, rather than the data curation domain. It's just an NHS research domain. Have I misrepresented you, John?
No, hi there. So let me have another stab at trying to articulate it. So obviously we're working on, we're part of the Yorkshire and Humber SDE, working on how we're going to bring data together and where some of that should happen. Obviously part of that is a lot of conversations with our ICB. ICB have programs where they're already looking to link data that it doesn't already exist, Connected Health, Humber, North Yorkshire, etc., etc. They want to link with local authority data, etc., etc. This would be also valuable for research. And I guess what I'm trying to articulate is, obviously that slide showed the ICBs as being kind of downstream, and obviously the SDE program has really been about research. And obviously if you're wanting to link data, you're going to have a situation where ICBs or other NHS organisations are wanting to link data for those population health, and then we're flowing data into an SDE to do the same for a research perspective. And I just wondered, is there an opportunity to cover both of those through one linkage, obviously with information governance, etc., around it, and potentially, obviously, that would leverage additional funding sources potentially, and also a demonstration of the value of linking that data and the work involved in doing so.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, makes sense to me what you just said, John. Thank you.
I thought Claire.
And Claire, I think, said put a thumbs up as well. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to scoot down and yell if you think I've gone past your points that are needed to be discussed. I'm going to go down to the topic of it was Carol. To come back to funding, how do you cost or charge across a federated network? Maybe discussion for the future. I think that's a great topic of how the heck does that work? If we are federating, what does that model look like? And Claire, the fact that you've been thinking about that within the structure of the federated in SDE network, maybe there's some things we can build on that looks at that when it's outside one organisation across more than one organisation. That's a great, seems a great suggestion, Carol. Any points for anyone to add?
I might just reflect a little bit on that in terms of some of the recent, and I think it's a topic that it needs to continue continually being revisited, because I think it's quite embryonic in the way that we're starting to form and model. So there are examples within the NHS England SDE research network at present of federated delivery, which have therefore had to tackle this exact question about actually how do we arrange the funding flow for a particular project and the commercial arrangements associated to that project. There have been a couple of different approaches, but I think all of them are underpinned by a principle or a couple of principles of ensuring cost recovery, which is one of the overarching principles that I spoke to earlier in terms of the overall commercial arrangements, but therefore ensuring that that is reflected in the way that any federated commercial arrangement is constructed. And the second is one of kind of fairness, of ensuring that any additional return is also distributed above and beyond the immediate cost recovery. So in those instances so far, the majority of cases seek to have one prime SDE who would arrange the contractual agreement and front the commercial arrangement. However, in the but behind that there is quite a complex set of kind of legal agreements in the way that risk is then backed off and the commercial arrangements and the funding flow is constructed. As I say, nothing is yet set in stone, and I think there's always benefit in having flexibility, but we're starting to build out what those models could look like and where there are challenges in that model, which may be a topic for a future session where we can share a bit more and get into some detail of it.
Thanks very much. Yeah, conscious of our time, 4 minutes to go. Loads of debate, discussion. I'm going to try and see if I can cover a couple more, if that's okay. Just a quick reminder on the Slido. Thank you very much for your, it looks as though, again, the funding event in June, 90% of people said that would be a good idea. So again, very positive response there. Looks like we're getting a lot of steer from what people here want to happen. Quick on Liz M. With a point of time, you bring up some discussion about the wider crisis of funding across the. It seems to be. Is there anything you wanted to add? Lots of people, well, a few people have made thumbs up and such like.
Yeah, it's just listening to this about how do we fund stuff, and then you see in the news that my own institution's making hundreds of job cuts. I mean, it's all done. We've got the best of intentions. There's a lot of us who are working across multiple projects, and we're trying our best to make movement in the field. And funding is one of those things that's, I don't know, within Wales, it's really, really, really hard to try and kind of get all the pieces moving in the right direction. So I think that we would absolutely like to be engaged in conversations. I also put it on here about the UK in inverted commas. There are people within Wales that, Gerald's commented, and Jen Selby, who's a colleague who works in the NHS. There's a lot more of us who want to be involved in this, and I think that probably by having a slightly wider spread of people who are involved might be quite beneficial in you kind of getting the Welsh perspective on things. I think that's basically what I was hoping to say. I know we're a bit short of time.
No, that's brilliant. This is a UK type environment. It's not an English type environment. This UK TRE. I think all the feedback is very, very positive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
No, great. There's some comments there about documents, blueprints from Amy, and also the federated TRE things. I can't see any. I'm probably missing. I'm less concerned about Tony Wildish commented about the proliferation, more about the proliferation of architecture standards. I think that's one that probably Simon and others have pointed about. There is a standard approach that people are trying to move towards. I think there's a really good points. And one of the other working groups is looking at this, not just the Scerri working group, but others. In the UK TRE community. Second question now. Okay, I'm conscious. I can't. Can anyone else see a question that I've not got to or I haven't picked up? Paul, there was an ask around Paul Colvin-Nash, an ask around a UK TRE. That is not our place. We see this as vested in the landscape, to invest in the landscape of data controllers. However, we do want to see harmonization, don't want to invest in another asset for the sake of it. Would need strong and robust justification for us to fund such. See commentary around recent MRC, NIHR digital and data platforms calls. Cool. In that line, we got 1 minute. Just to close the event off in a formal way, if that's okay. Quickly get to a shared screen, and then we will, hopefully I've not done anyone a disservice with their questions. Really thank you for all of that engaging debate. Just a reminder of next, the 26th, and that we will send a feedback form out to get feedback on this specific event. Really thank you very much for attending. Thanks to Claire and Lisa. I'm speaking as well on your behalf. So thank you very much for you both for what you've contributed. Thank you for everyone for your engaging discussion. Hopefully we'll get this up on YouTube and such like so that people can reflect on it. We had about 70 people attend, which I think is a great opportunity. Thank you for the answers to the Slido questions. It looks like we need or want to go forward as a community with this. We'd love you to engage directly with us, to offer your inputs. Those that say yes or whatever, please join us. And with that, I'll say thank you. I'll stop the recording, and appreciate your day and have a great rest of it.